Hello and welcome to our webinar, Using Modeling and Simulation in Medical Device Development, presented today by Stuart Wright, Industry Process Expert at Dassault Systèmes. My name is Michael Gans, Senior Program Manager for Life Sciences at Dassault Systèmes, and I will be moderating this session. Before we begin, I'd like to note that attendee phone lines are muted. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them at any time via the questions window in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Just as a reminder, this is the third webinar in our series, the Dassault Systèmes Platform for Medical Devices. For those of you who have been joining us for our previous events, I hope you have enjoyed them and found them interesting, and I'm confident that today's session will continue that trend and impart even more valuable information. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn the webinar over to Stuart to begin today's presentation. Stuart, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, and good morning, everybody. Rather than start with a slide about Dassault Systèmes and Simulia and our breadth and depth, I thought I'd start with something more enthralling. What you were watching is a simulation. This is a clinical view of a virtual human model, a model of the human heart that mimics its behavior using numerical methods. This is not CGI. I'm showing you this so that you can better appreciate what simulation in life sciences is now capable of. As you can see, the model incorporates three physics: electrical, structural, and fluid flow. The heart is electrically excited, which causes muscle contraction, in turn driving blood flow. You can see in the central animation that we have inserted two artificial valves into the heart to study their performance, but we may have inserted pacemaker leads, leadless pacemaker units, angioplasty rings, or other therapeutic devices. This is a very advanced model, but the degree to which simulation is used in the life sciences industry is not as advanced as the usage paradigms of industries such as T&M and A&D, but it is evolving. In this webinar, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the need for simulation in life sciences, and then I will focus on showing you some application examples for medical devices and in the pharmaceutical industry for combination devices. It's a non-technical presentation, and I hope that come the end of it, if we do have time for some non-technical questions, we'll invite you to post some. But in any event, I hope that you will remain in contact with us and please reach out for further information. I'd like to first start by discussing why is there room for an increased simulation role in the life sciences industry. Firstly, looking at the left of the slide, the industry wants to innovate in ways that optimize the patient experience and the therapeutic outcome, and they do this via the personalization of therapies. But to innovate for personalization takes commitment and a good deal of R&D bandwidth. Secondly, looking at the central image, the cost of getting a new device to market continues to rise. This necessarily constrains R&D bandwidth, and unless the curve is inflected, most companies will not have the capacity to aggressively pursue personalization. Thirdly, and here's the positive news, the FDA wants to find less expensive ways of validating products for market approval, one of which is the use of simulation. We are currently working with the FDA using the living heart human model that you already saw as the basis for conducting development and an in silico clinical trial of a cardiac device. Turning back to the runaway costs of development, there are a number of drivers, but one is physical testing. We all know that the industry has been and continues to be physical test dominated. Bench, then animal, then cadaver, then animal trials, and finally human clinical trials. Protecting the patient from risk is the primary goal of this sequence, but it means that programs are protracted and extremely expensive. First tests of products in a real human environment come late and are limited in how much they can inform us. Therefore, there are still inherent risks to the patients in a trial and to patients receiving the therapy post-market. A thrust of the FDA is to be more open to the use of simulation in evidence. There's significant potential to reduce the time and cost of development by bringing virtual testing into the human environment way upstream in the development process and continuing all the way through clinical trials. This requires access to simulation across a broad set of disciplines and using some fundamental principles for developing defensible simulation-based decision support. I'm going to talk about those fundamental principles now. The first principle is to build your simulation capabilities to the required capability maturity of effectiveness, which is another word for accuracy, and efficiency, which could be seen as the cost to own, deploy, and exercise. And do that across the disciplines that are necessary for you. Simulation capable of being used in decision support must be defensible and repeatable. Safe devices are engineered on reliable simulation results. Most life science companies use at least some simulation during R&D. So this is the foundation on which to build. Develop the required capability, the best practices, the personnel skills that your innovation portfolio demands. And here's a couple of illustrations of the key areas which you will probably be focusing upon. Second principle, for years now, other industries have been focusing on modeling the operational environment of their products. For life sciences, the environment is the human. So you must improve your game in modeling the human environment. It's less difficult to simulate bench tests, but these are not the real operational environment of your products. The virtual human model must be the next capability developed. Without it, you're guessing at interactions, loads, boundary conditions, and ultimately about device performance. There's two parts to this argument. First, the right loads and boundary conditions are needed for which to design products that perform correctly. A bench test is artificial. We can do better with a virtual human model. Second, you need to evaluate performance in the final operating environment. Virtual human modeling readies you for in silico clinical trials with a device you already know to be safe. And then finally, the third principle. Up to this level of capability, it's possible to deploy simulation as a craft to a small number of personnel and still achieve adequate productivity and control. However, at this point, your paradigm must change. Deterministic simulations may be okay in preliminary design, but as detailed design progresses, the effects of variation must be characterized. This means making a very important transition into the multi-run domains whereby sensitivity and performance spaces can be explored and ultimately robustness can be understood and engineered into products. You see this is expressed in the middle of the slide in the business changes box. In effecting this paradigm change, it becomes necessary to assure effectiveness, efficiency, quality, and defensibility. The 3D Experience platform is our collaborative digital infrastructure that comprises the services and apps necessary to defensively leverage simulation against your business objectives. So the message in this third principle, using multi-run approaches and philosophies, you can engineer products that perform better for populations of users. Ultimately, you can get to innovation for personalization, which is the ability to engineer features into devices that allows them to adapt to the variations between users. Perhaps they adapt automatically, perhaps they adapt with a switch or a dial, but products so well engineered that the user can tune them to their own needs and optimize their own experience. Think of these three principles as I proceed. In this presentation, I won't be illustrating structural simulation. It's a domain in which our primary solver, Abacus, is extremely well known and respected, and anyone conducting simulation in this industry will know something about the capabilities of Abacus already. Rather, let's start with a general overview of the modeling of fluids problems, an area that you may not immediately think of Simulia for, but you should, because we have developed our fluid simulation capabilities dramatically in recent years. So whereas there are a number of ways to mathematically model fluids, there are two methods that dominate. Navier-Stokes numerical methods have been used for decades, and they are the more common approach to simulate fluids behaviors. This method has many strengths, but it cannot solve all fluid problems, and it can be challenging to prepare models because of the need to mesh the fluid domain. Lattice-Boltzmann methods have not been available until relatively recently in simulation history, but they are gaining favor quickly for their ability to solve the toughest of fluids problems with highly deforming structures, high levels of turbulence, and pinched flow. A major advantage of LM methods is that they are meshless, which makes for some very important advantages. So now I'm going to transition to illustrations, and that will be my mode for the rest of the presentation. We'll start with a clinical application, the cerebral aneurysm. When an artery loses structural integrity, its geometry changes. A blood recirculation and stagnation zone forms, and rupture or thromboses pose very great threats to the patient. The clinician can use Simulian Navier-Stokes capabilities to evaluate the risk that the aneurysm poses, looking for likely rupture points and understanding the blood flow pattern. Aneurysms can be corrected with stent graft that prevents fluid flow within the aneurysm, but the right stent graft must be selected. And again, here the clinician can use our simulation to identify the right size and type of stent graft to correct the blood flow to a normal condition. Another important application area is in artificial heart valves, annuloplasty rings, and mitral valve clips. One condition is mitral valve regurgitation, the backflow of blood through the mitral valve. This can happen for a number of reasons, one of which is the change in shape of the fibrous mitral valve annulus, which results in the leaflet of the valve itself becoming missing and failing to close properly. This is a challenging fluids problem to simulate for two very important reasons. The valve leaflets are moving very large amounts, making conventional meshed fluid method very difficult to apply. And the blood flow is being pinched off, a condition that is not possible to accomplish with meshed methods. In the simulation here, the anatomy is modeled with and without the corrective annuloplasty ring using a coupled abacus LHHM and X-flow simulation. By using the meshless lattice Boltzmann approach, the pinching of the blood flow is captured easily and the amount of regurgitation during a heartbeat before and after surgery is predicted. Thus, developers can engineer more effective devices, and the right size of annuloplasty ring can be selected by a clinician before surgery. This is the same application. In the left-hand image, we can see the regurgitation under a constant blood pressure. Before it was pulsating, now it's constant. The simulation gives us all of the information we need to prescribe the best corrective action for the patient. Next, drug injection is an application area that appears deceptively simple. A pressurized fluid being squeezed into a narrow tube. So there's a lot that is complex about this problem. As device engineers strive to improve the patient experience, the injection devices must continue to improve. In this case, the engineer is asking himself if a viscous drug can be delivered through the needle, or will leakage around the plunger occur? There's very little flow taking place in this limiting condition, and the fluid is being nipped down from a large volume to a very narrow diameter. Again, a simulation very hard or impossible to accomplish with meshed fluid domains. The potential for leakage around the plunger is explicitly captured because the fluid can flow between the flexible plunger and the flexible syringe wall. This is especially valuable capability when exploring the effects of plunger misalignment or engineering wearable devices to deliver a drug via a micro pump. A very current application area is in the transmission of contaminants in the near and the far field. Since the hospitals of Wuhan City couldn't accommodate so many infected people in short term, the Chinese government decided to build a new hospital, which they did in 12 days. Incredible. We worked with our customer in designing the hospital using our lattice Boltzmann solutions. The goal was to perform the pollution dispersion simulation and generate the analysis report to adjust the HVAC system if there were any issues. These animations show the simulation for only one room, though we simulated the entire hospital in the same manner. The left-hand animation illustrates the HVAC airflow within the room with the door closed. The second illustration illustrates how the breath from a person in the bed circulates around the room over time. I'm sorry that these animations seem to be pausing after the first cycle. Sneezing and coughing are two ways pathogens spread. To better understand the effectiveness of covering your sneeze or cough, we simulated a human sneeze. The sneeze event is based on published data, including gas velocity as a function of time, droplet particle size and distribution. The result is a realistic model of a sneeze event. The video also highlights surfaces being contaminated, like the feet of the person and the shoulders of other surrounding persons. It shows how covering your sneeze affects the particle distribution in the air, a very current application capability. Let's take a close-up look at the tricuspid heart valve. This is a fabulous illustration of the Power Advanced Fluids simulation capabilities. You can clearly see the fidelity of both the structure simulation and the fluid flow, which are of course coupled together. Moving on, in this illustration, a device engineering team must engineer its own pump for a wearable drug injector, the best choice being a peristaltic pump. The performance of the pump is dependent upon a number of parameters, including the diameter of the main flow tube, connecting the drug reservoir to the cannula in the skin, the pinch load of the rotor on the tube, and the speed of rotation of the rotor. The peristaltic pump is a simple device favored for the fact that no moving parts come into contact with the drug, but its performance is difficult to characterize with accuracy without the use of advanced simulation methods. In this case, the performance of the pump must be known with reliable accuracy because it is at once a pump and a dose measuring device. The team used finite element modeling to represent the structural elements of the pump, including the flexible latex tube and the rotor that pinches the tube against the casing. That's what you see on the left. They modeled the drug using a lattice-Boltzmann approach, and that's what you see on the right. The two domains, structure and fluid, were numerically coupled together to capture the effects of fluid on structure and conversely structure on fluid. So even though you appear to be looking at two models here, it is in fact only one model with two domains, coupled at the fluid structure interface, which is the wetted inner surface of the tube. Inspecting the results for the fluid domain, seen here, we can inspect the pressure and flow characteristics within the tube, tuning the pump for degree of pinching and resultant backflow, peak pressure capability, flow and flow rate. The engineering team have explored the use of different gauges of tube and other pump parameters so that the best of a great many design alternatives can be identified without ever having to build a physical prototype. Now let's move along. Let's take a look now at a few applications specific to the pharmaceutical industry. There are a number of applications for simulation in bulk materials handling. Here we see screening of particle size using screens, particle dispensing from a hopper, and mixing that all use discrete element modeling. We can vary the adhesion between particles, their size distribution, the lubrication, and their individual material properties. Abaqus's discrete element modeling allows us to simulate processes such as pill compaction. In this problem, a mixture of particle species and sizes are compressed together. The particles are individually deformed plastically according to their own local loading environment, and they adhere together according to surface properties. A multi-stage forming process is used that mimics the pressing process in the plant, and the result is a pill for which we can evaluate its strength and stiffness characteristics. Now, drugs must be packaged, and so simulation can be applied in packaging, development, and evaluation. Of course, devices must also be packaged. The forming of blister packs and the peeling of the protective layer can be evaluated, so too the application and removal force for pill bottles, closures, etc., and the durability of other packaged forms. Packaged products must be engineered for adverse loading events, such as unintentional drop, and Abaqus Explicit is used very, very extensively in this application. Often forming and filling processes involve hazard loads by design, as is the case in this illustration on the right, where an abacus-coupled Euler-Lagrange method is used to simulate the entire filling, sealing, and drop sequence of a product such as a saline bag. Now, medical devices interact with the human patient. Therefore, we must be able to simulate the human environment and the interaction we can expect. It is almost always the interaction that dictates the patient experience, and manufacturers want to focus on innovations to improve that experience. One such interaction is illustrated here, where a needle interacts with a multi-layered model of the skin. The interest here is in predicting resistance forces and tissue deformation. Now, skin is notoriously variable from patient to patient, and so this is an application area where multi-run probabilistic methods must be used to understand the envelopes of needle performance. Once the drug is inside the tissue, we must understand how it forms the bolus and how it disperses, both important parts of the post-injection patient experience. Needles aren't the only devices to interact with skin. Here we see a concept for a wearable, smart drug delivery device. It's fastened to the skin via an adhesive base plate, which must not detach as a result of movement and activity. Abacus is used to evaluate the loads between skin and adhesive plate during different arm and hand motions, and in this case gives insights to the performance of the adhesive and the movement of the device cannula inserted between the outlet port and the vein in the arm. Now let's take a close look at some advances that are taking place in using simulation to predict drug side effects. Arrhythmia of the heart is a not uncommon side effect for some classes of drug, but it's hard before clinical trials to anticipate how they will affect heartbeat. They do so because of the effect they have on specific ion channels in the heart. When this happens, the propagation of electrical signal in the heart changes, and this results in a mistimed firing of muscles in and around the heart, resulting in an irregular heartbeat. This really is the cutting edge of multidisciplinary simulation. By coupling molecular modeling to characterize the interaction of a drug with an ion channel, with models that relate those ion channel changes to their effect on the bioelectrical properties of the network in the heart that are responsible for transmitting signals, and their effects on the responsiveness of muscle fibers to excitation, and then mapping that into the living heart human model you saw on the first two slides, we can predict the effect of a drug on heartbeat. These animations illustrate just that for different concentrations of a specific drug. The living heart human model can be used to give us a virtual ECG trace for the heart, and using this, we can explore the drug side effects in a manner familiar to any cardiologist. Finally, entering the final section of this presentation, let's take a look at some applications of electromagnetic simulation in medical device development. There's four primary areas for the use of electromagnetic simulation: design of electromagnetic or high energy particle medical imaging systems, design of passive or active devices for safety in imaging systems, design of active medical device communications and antenna systems, and design of electromagnetic or high energy particle therapeutic systems. Of course, electromagnetic simulation is also used in the engineering of motors, transmitters, receivers, electronics, and other components in a multitude of types of medical equipment and bedside and hospital equipment. But these applications are not specific to life sciences, so I won't cover them here. Most of the application areas specific to LS are about safety of a patient or wearer of a device when exposed to various forms of electromagnetic radiation. We cannot easily and comfortably measure inside the body, but simulation is an excellent alternative. Physical testing still dominates, but it is flawed because most often a cylindrical or brick-shaped phantom made of plastic and filled with the fluid that imitates the body tissue is used. Here we see the power loss distribution inside a phantom placed in an MRI head coil. Sometimes a human-shaped phantom is used with the same material properties as the brick, and we can observe the significant differences in this are hotspots. Finally, looking at a realistic model of the human head with detailed heterogeneous tissues like bones, muscles, fat, and brain, we can see there are some similarities as before, but an important hotspot in the brain is not predicted in the phantom models. This illustrates a fundamental advantage of simulation. We can just as easily simulate using a realistic human being as we can a lump of gel in a box. Physical testing cannot do that. So for some applications, it would be easier to use the homogeneous phantom models, especially when comparing to measurement results where only a phantom can be used. However, in most cases, for the reasons we just saw, we would like to use a more detailed model, and we have two further options. Voxel models that are made of elements like 3D pixels with a certain resolution, and CAD-based models, for example, from CATIA or SolidWorks, with solids for each individual organ. Of course, to warrant using a more complex human model, we must have more complex material models to describe it. The CST Studio suite, the material library, contains many different human tissue properties with electromagnetic, thermal, and mechanical properties. The heterogeneous voxel family is extensive. 7 different models representing different age groups and genders of various heights and weights are included in the voxel family. For completion of portfolio, a pregnant woman voxel with 24-week fetus is also part of the family database. Surface biomodels are CAD-based models that consist of Tom and Anna plus children of different ages. These are either pre-voxelized or can be voxelized during import with customized resolution. The heterogeneous model Nellie is derived from the US National Library of Medicine's Female Visible Human Project and is optimized for tetrahedral meshing. So we have a very broad range of human models that we can utilize in our electromagnetic simulations for the sake of precision, accuracy, and insights. Let's talk about MRI design. It's challenging. Simulation is a very valuable tool in this area. First, we start with gradient coils in the X and Y directions to position the excitation around a certain region of the subject being scanned. This activates a certain 2D slice in the subject in the XY plane and combined with a Z gradient coil to activate a volume subsection to be imaged. Then we have a main coil to create a strong static magnetic field. Furthermore, a larger coil around the main coil compensates for the fields to the outside in order to contain the static field within the MRI coil system. Got it? And typically we would need a passive shield in addition to the active shielding coil. Now, since magnetic fields are very strong, associated mechanical deformation can occur if the coils are not designed properly. Next, superconducting magnets are commonly used to achieve these high field strengths, and there are dangers of a devastating event called quenching that can cause dynamic structural failure. A comprehensive analysis can be done by running many possible simulations to ensure this does not happen. On the other hand, we have high-frequency coil or RF birdcage coil that excites the protons in the subject in order to form an image. An internal circuitry is typically involved in order to control the RF coil frequency. Implant safety evaluations can be carried out using virtualized testing to ensure the implants do not heat up beyond prescribed limits while imaging. A bioheat solver can be used to calculate the temperature distribution inside the body while the patient is being scanned. This takes into account effects such as metabolic heating and blood perfusion. And finally, the completely simulated MR image can be obtained. The brain section image may look like a real MR image, but this is obtained completely by simulation. Thus, I don't want you to miss the point here. The end-to-end workflow, starting from gradient, static, and RF coils until the final image, can all be completely virtualized and simulated, even before a physical prototype is manufactured. This is hugely valuable for this extremely complex type of equipment. Now, about behavior, the MR system can behave differently based on the size and shape of the subject being scanned, as seen here. The advantage with simulation is one can easily replace the body models to understand how the device performs over a population set and try to optimize it to meet the specifications in all cases. Comparing simulation results with measurement, we see qualitatively they agree, although the measured data was with human subjects with slightly different body masses and heights. Let's talk about safety and SAR. A well-established way to assess the safety of humans from MRI systems is to look at SAR, or specific absorption rate. Using simulation, we see the highest local SAR is located in the left arm. In a real MRI system, the SAR evaluation can be time-consuming, but simulation helps us to evaluate worst-case combinations of coil excitations in a much faster manner. This leads us into the next topic of thermal dosage. This is a widely used criterion of damage detection for biological tissues exposed to electromagnetic fields of any kind. The technique integrates the temperature at every point in the body and evaluates in relation to how long this part of the body was facing a temperature of 43 degrees Celsius. If we look at the temperature scale, we see the peak time is about 10 seconds in this case, and this dosage is within the prescribed limits. So far, we looked at the safety aspects of a human subject in an MRI environment. What happens in the case where the patient has a metallic implant and they have to undergo a scan? How do we assess the safety in such scenarios? The ASTM standard F2182 for passive implant safety requires a phantom shaped like a brick filled with a saline gel that imitates the tissues. In this case, we have a knee implant made of titanium alloy. The MRI power input commensurate with a whole body SAR of, this is the way the test is run, with 2 watts per kilogram, is switched on for 15 minutes and then switched off. One can see the temperature rise at the tips of the implant as a function of time, where it exponentially rises, reaching a brief steady state before decaying off as the power is switched off. When the same procedure is repeated with a detailed human body model at the knee joint, the electrical field distribution is quite different on the implant. For this reason, the FDA has more recently provided guidelines to use human simulation models, wherein the implants can be certified for safety if they meet the limits with those virtual human models. I realize I'm running over a little bit. I apologize for that. I hope you can stay with me. We only have a couple more minutes to go. Another example here of an implant is the artificial heart valve. The thin, sharp metallic frame could, in theory, lead to a higher temperature rise at the ends of the implant where field discontinuities exist. But we see from the plot that the rise is only about 0.3 degrees C after 15 minutes of exposure. So this would be fine to be certified as MR safe and implanted in patients. Nevertheless, it is imperative for medical device manufacturers to obtain regulatory approval for all their implants before they can be certified safe for usage. And simulation plays a big role in reducing time and cost of physical testing. So far we've discussed about applications where we try to avoid heating in tissues. In this application, we do want to heat tissues and destroy cells that are malignant. Especially if tumors are small, it's very difficult to remove them by surgery, and an alternate method is required, such as thermal ablation. Here, an electrode is invasively inserted to the center of the tumor, where the patient is lying on a metallic ground plane, and an RF energy is injected into the electrode to obtain a hotspot near the electrode tip. But how long do we heat it for, and how much power do we put in? This is exactly where simulation can provide insights into treatment planning. The right power for the right amount of time destroys target cells and leaves healthy cells unharmed. This really helps to provide personalized healthcare, since a patient with a tumor in their organ can undergo MRI imaging, which could be translated into a virtual 3D model, and these simulations can then be carried out to precisely prescribe the therapy. Let's take a closer look at the simulated electrical field distribution on the arm of a person wearing a smart tracking device. The images show the phase animation of the near fields and how they propagate in free space around the body. Some of the questions we can ask and answer include where to position antennae to get the best far-field communication without causing high power losses. Or would a single antenna be sufficient to provide a 360-degree coverage? Or how would the return loss of the antenna be affected by placing it in different locations? How much of the human body should we simulate, etc.? Then, after looking at some of the wearables on the body, let's finally change gears and look at the implanted device such as a pacemaker. The Living Heart Project, a consortium involving Simulia and many partners, has developed a simulation tool that models the mechanical, electrical, and fluid functions of the heart, including how it is influenced by the electrical current on its surface. Placing it in a full body allows us to study different things, e.g. how the heart's electrical signal appears as ECG signals at the surface, or conversely, how the heart is influenced by external fields. These could be wanted, e.g. electrical signals from a pacemaker, or unwanted, say induced by an electrostatic discharge. The Living Heart model has nice synergies with the Simulia CST electromagnetic solution. When we look at classical pacemaker design, it requires a large battery case and surgery would be necessary if the battery drains away. Active research is being conducted to miniaturize the pacemaker to be able to be wirelessly powered and recharged from outside the body. An example is the midfield wireless charging using surface waves to couple the energy from coils placed on the surface of the chest. All of these illustrations can be accomplished with Simulia CST Studio Suite. And then finally, let me summarize by bringing us back to the beginning. There's a rapidly growing role for simulation in life sciences. But for it to be really accepted, the capability needs to be developed with discipline. This has already taken place in other industries such as transportation and mobility, aerospace and defense. So firstly, we need to build foundational capabilities. There are a number of core disciplines that manufacturers must have, and those core disciplines should be elevated to a level of capability maturity that is commensurate with business objectives. And we have a portfolio with the options that are required. Secondly, the human environment needs to be modeled. That is where the loads and boundary conditions of realistic simulation come from. And it's what leads us on the path to in silico clinical trials. We are trending towards multi-physics modeling inside the human body, and modeling the human environment is, as I say, required. And then model the variation. Any validated simulation can already be elevated to multi-run to explore performance space in populations. So with that final word, I thank you very much for your attention. I apologize for running over. I don't think we have time for questions now, but please do pose any questions that you do have, and I'll hand it back to Michael. He will collect those questions, curate them, and we will get back to you with answers. So back to you, Michael.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stuart. That was an excellent presentation. As Stuart mentioned, I'm afraid we have gone a bit over time. If you did ask any questions during the presentation or you'd like to ask questions, we will be sure to follow up with you offline. As I mentioned earlier, this is the third webinar in our series of Dassault Systèmes platform applications for medical devices. I have posted the URL in order for you to find the landing page where you can register for our upcoming sessions, as well as download the on-demand sessions. Once again, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on 3ds.com. Thank you so much, Stuart, for sharing your time and expertise today. It's clear that the audience found this information very useful and interesting. We hope to see you all in the next event. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks, everybody.